Question 1. Upon reviewing a security finding indicating unusual API activity within an AWS account, what is the most effective and compliant approach for the security team to investigate the root cause and scope of this activity, adhering to U.S. regulatory frameworks and AWS security best practices? Option A. Document the finding and schedule a detailed investigation to commence only after the next scheduled quarterly security review to conserve resources. Option B. Enable Amazon Detective and configure it to ingest relevant data sources, such as AWS CloudTrail logs and VPC flow logs, to gain contextualized insights and visualize the activity. Option C. Grant the security team broad administrative access to all AWS services involved in the suspicious activity to allow for direct inspection and remediation. Option D. Manually export raw log files from various AWS services, such as CloudTrail and GuardDuty, to an on-premises server for offline analysis by the security team. Correct answer is B. Enable Amazon Detective and configure it to ingest relevant data sources, such as AWS CloudTrail logs and VPC flow logs, to gain contextualized insights and visualize the activity. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, effectively leveraging specialized tools to investigate potential security incidents without introducing new risks or violating compliance requirements. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid and thorough investigation with the imperative to maintain data integrity, privacy, and adherence to AWS security best practices and relevant U.S. regulatory frameworks that govern data handling and security incident response. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the use of a purpose-built, AWS-native service designed for security investigation. Amazon Detective is engineered to ingest and analyze security data from various AWS sources, providing a centralized and contextualized view of potential threats. By enabling Detective and configuring it to ingest relevant data sources, the security team can efficiently identify the scope and root cause of the security finding. This aligns with U.S. regulatory expectations for prompt and effective incident response, as well as the principle of least privilege by only granting necessary permissions for the investigation. Furthermore, it adheres to AWS security best practices by utilizing managed services that are designed to be secure and compliant. An incorrect approach that involves manually exporting and analyzing raw logs from multiple disparate sources without proper sanitization or access controls poses significant regulatory and ethical failures. This method is prone to errors, time-consuming, and increases the risk of data exfiltration or accidental exposure of sensitive information, which could violate data privacy regulations like HIPAA, if applicable to the data, or general data protection principles. It also fails to leverage the specialized capabilities of security tools, leading to a less efficient and potentially less accurate investigation. Another incorrect approach, such as granting broad administrative access to the security team to investigate directly within production environments, represents a severe security and compliance failure. This violates the principle of least privilege, increasing the attack surface and the potential for unintended consequences or malicious activity. Such broad access could lead to accidental data modification or deletion, impacting business operations and potentially violating data integrity requirements mandated by various U.S. regulations. It also creates an auditability gap, making it difficult to track actions taken during the investigation. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves delaying the investigation until a formal compliance audit is scheduled is a critical failure in security incident response. U.S. regulations and industry best practices mandate timely detection, investigation, and remediation of security incidents to minimize damage and prevent recurrence. Postponing an investigation based on audit schedules demonstrates a lack of proactive security posture and a disregard for potential ongoing threats, which can have severe legal and financial repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the nature of the security finding and its potential impact. 2. Identifying available and appropriate security tools and services within the AWS environment. 3. Evaluating these tools against security best practices, compliance requirements, and the principle of least privilege. 4. prioritizing the use of managed, purpose-built services like Amazon Detective for efficient and secure investigation. 5. Implementing robust access controls and audit logging for all investigative activities. 6. Ensuring that the investigation process itself does not introduce new security risks or compliance violations. Question 2. System analysis indicates that an organization is experiencing significant configuration drift across its AWS environment, leading to potential security vulnerabilities and compliance concerns. The security team needs to implement a robust solution for tracking resource configurations and ensuring ongoing adherence to defined security baselines and regulatory requirements. Which of the following approaches best addresses this implementation challenge? Option A. Manually review AWS config compliance reports on a quarterly basis and initiate manual remediation efforts for any identified deviations. Option B. Enable AWS config to track all supported resource types without defining any specific compliance rules or remediation actions, relying solely on the generated configuration history for audits. Option C. Implement a limited set of generic AWS config managed rules that cover broad security categories without developing custom rules or configuring automated remediation. Option D. Enable AWS config to track all supported resource types and configure automated remediation actions for all non-compliant resources based on predefined AWS config rules and custom rules tailored to specific security policies. The correct answer is D. Enable AWS config to track all supported resource types and configure automated remediation actions for all non-compliant resources based on predefined AWS config rules and custom rules tailored to specific security policies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, maintaining continuous compliance with evolving security configurations across a dynamic AWS environment. The professional challenge lies in effectively leveraging AWS config to not only track resource configurations, but also to proactively identify and remediate deviations from established security baselines, particularly when dealing with a large and diverse set of AWS resources. The need for accurate, timely, and actionable compliance data is paramount, especially in regulated industries where auditability and demonstrable adherence to security policies are critical. Failure to implement a robust tracking and compliance mechanism can lead to security vulnerabilities, compliance violations, and significant business risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves establishing AWS config rules that precisely map to the organization's security policies and regulatory requirements. This includes defining custom rules where necessary to capture specific security controls not covered by managed rules. Crucially, the approach must include the configuration of remediation actions, either through AWS config's built-in remediation capabilities, or by integrating with other AWS services like AWS Systems Manager Automation or Lambda functions. This ensures that non-compliant resources are automatically or semi-automatically brought back into compliance, minimizing the window of exposure. The continuous monitoring and automated remediation aspects are key to demonstrating ongoing compliance and reducing the manual effort required for audits. This aligns with best practices for cloud security governance and the principle of least privilege by ensuring resources adhere to defined security postures. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on manual periodic reviews of AWS config compliance data. This fails to provide continuous monitoring and leaves the environment vulnerable to configuration drift between reviews. It is also highly inefficient and prone to human error, increasing the risk of compliance gaps. From a regulatory perspective, this approach often falls short of demonstrating proactive and continuous compliance, which is a common expectation in many security frameworks. Another incorrect approach is to enable AWS config resource tracking without defining any compliance rules or remediation actions. While this provides visibility into configuration changes, it does not actively enforce security policies or ensure compliance. This approach generates a large volume of data that may not be effectively utilized for security posture management, leading to a data-rich, insight-poor situation. It fails to meet the proactive compliance requirements mandated by many security standards. A third incorrect approach is to implement overly broad or generic AWS config rules that do not accurately reflect specific security requirements or regulatory mandates. This can lead to a high number of false positives or, conversely, miscritical noncompliance issues. It also makes the remediation process inefficient, as teams may spend time addressing non-critical alerts. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of the specific compliance obligations and the nuances of the organization's security posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to AWS config implementation. This begins with a thorough understanding of the organization's security policies, regulatory obligation, and the specific AWS resources in use. The next step is to identify relevant AWS config managed rules, and where necessary, develop custom rules that precisely map to these requirements. Following this, a robust remediation strategy must be designed and implemented, leveraging automation to ensure timely correction of non-compliant resources. Regular review and refinement of config rules and remediation actions are essential to adapt to evolving threats and policy changes. This proactive and automated approach ensures continuous compliance, reduces operational overhead, and strengthens the overall security posture. Question 3. Implementation of IAM permissions boundaries is being considered to prevent the uncontrolled expansion of privileges for IAM users and roles within an AWS account. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principle of least privilege and proactive security governance for managing IAM permissions growth? Option A. Implementing AWS config rules to detect and alert on IAM policies that grant overly permissive access, with manual remediation processes. Option B. Utilizing IAM permissions boundaries to define the maximum permissions that can be granted to an IAM entity, in conjunction with identity-based policies that grant specific necessary permissions. Option C. Relying solely on identity-based policies crafted by administrators to grant specific permissions, with no additional controls to cap maximum allowable access. Option D. Employing service control policies, SCP, at the AWS organization's level to restrict the use of certain AWS services across all accounts, without granular IAM policy review. The correct answer is C. Relying solely on identity-based policies crafted by administrators to grant specific permissions, with no additional controls to cap maximum allowable access. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, balancing operational agility with robust security governance. As an organization scales its AWS usage, the potential for unintended permission growth and the accumulation of excessive privileges increases significantly. This can lead to a wider attack surface, increased risk of data breaches, and noncompliance with security best practices and potential regulatory requirements. The challenge lies in implementing controls that prevent overpermissioning without hindering legitimate business operations. Correct approach analysis. Implementing IAM permissions boundaries is the best professional practice because it provides a declarative, centralized mechanism to enforce maximum permissions for IAM entities, users, and roles. This approach directly addresses the controlling permissions growth requirement by setting a ceiling on the permissions that can be granted, regardless of the identity-based policies attached. This ensures that even if an administrator inadvertently grants broad permissions in an identity-based policy, the permissions boundary will prevent those permissions from exceeding the defined limits. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and is a proactive measure against privilege creep, which is crucial for maintaining a strong security posture and meeting compliance obligations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Using only IAM policies without a permissions boundary is professionally unacceptable because it relies solely on the administrator's diligence in crafting and maintaining policies. This approach is reactive and susceptible to human error, leading to accidental overpermissioning and privilege creep. It does not provide a hard limit on permissions, making it difficult to enforce a consistent security baseline across the organization. This failure to implement a preventative control can lead to regulatory noncompliance if specific security standards mandate such controls. Relying solely on AWS config rules to detect overly permissive IAM policies is professionally insufficient as a primary control. While AWS config is excellent for monitoring and auditing, it is a detective control not a preventative one. By the time AWS config flags an issue, the overly permissive access may have already been exploited. This reactive approach increases the risk exposure and does not actively prevent the growth of excessive permissions, potentially violating security best practices that emphasize preventative measures. Implementing service control policies, SCP, at the organizational level to restrict specific AWS services is a valuable security measure, but does not directly address the granular control of IAM permissions growth for individual users and roles within an account. SCPs operate at the account level and are designed to enforce guardrails on what actions can be performed within an organization's AWS accounts. While they can limit the scope of services, they do not prevent an IAM user or role from being granted excessive permissions within an allowed service, which is the core problem permissions boundaries solve. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a defense-in-depth strategy for IAM security. The decision-making process should prioritize preventative controls over detective controls. When considering IAM permissions, the first step is to define the maximum allowable permissions for different roles or user groups using permissions boundaries. Subsequently, identity-based policies should be crafted to grant only the necessary permissions within those boundaries. Finally, detective controls like AWS Config and CloudTrail should be used to continuously monitor for deviations and potential policy violations, enabling rapid response and remediation. This layered approach ensures that even if one control fails, others are in place to mitigate risk. Question 4. Investigation of a critical alert from AWS Security Hub indicates a potential misconfiguration related to a CIS benchmark that also impacts a PCI DSS requirement. The alert suggests that a specific network access control list, ACL rule, while intended to allow necessary traffic, might be overly permissive, potentially exposing sensitive data. The security team is under pressure to maintain high availability for a critical customer-facing application that relies on this network configuration. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Escalate the finding directly to the PCI DSS external auditor for guidance on how to proceed, without further internal investigation or remediation attempts. Option B. Immediately disable the Network Access Control List rule to ensure compliance with both CIS benchmarks and PCI DSS, and then investigate the impact on the customer-facing application. Option C. Ignore the alert as the application is critical, and the potential risk is deemed low by the operations team, prioritizing business continuity over immediate compliance adjustments. Option D. Document the finding, assess the specific risk and impact of the overly permissive rule on sensitive data, and develop a phased remediation plan that minimizes disruption to the customer-facing application, involving relevant engineering teams. The correct answer is B. Immediately disable the Network Access Control List rule to ensure compliance with both CIS benchmarks and PCI DSS, and then investigate the impact on the customer-facing application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents an ethical dilemma where a security professional discovers a potential compliance gap that could impact sensitive customer data. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to address the gap with the potential disruption to business operations and the reporting obligations. The professional must navigate the complexities of AWS Security Hub standards, specifically CIS benchmarks and PCI DSS, while adhering to internal policies and regulatory requirements. The pressure to maintain operational continuity can conflict with the imperative for immediate remediation, making careful judgment and a structured approach essential. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic process of verification, documentation, and phased remediation. This aligns with best professional practices and regulatory expectations. By first verifying the finding and understanding its scope and impact, the professional ensures that actions are targeted and effective. Documenting the issue and its potential risks is crucial for accountability and for communicating with stakeholders. Prioritizing remediation based on risk and impact, and then implementing controls in a phased manner, minimizes disruption while ensuring compliance. This approach demonstrates due diligence, adherence to security best practices, and a commitment to regulatory compliance, particularly concerning standards like CIS benchmarks and PCI DSS, which mandate risk assessment and timely remediation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately disabling the feature without proper verification or impact assessment. This is a failure of due diligence and can lead to unnecessary operational disruption and potential business losses. It bypasses the critical step of understanding the root cause and the actual risk, which is a fundamental requirement of security best practices and regulatory frameworks like PCI DSS. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the finding due to its perceived low risk or the potential for operational disruption. This represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Ignoring compliance gaps, especially those related to security standards like CIS benchmarks and PCI DSS, can expose the organization to severe penalties, data breaches, and reputational damage. It demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a disregard for the organization's security posture and legal obligations. A third incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the issue to external auditors without internal verification or attempting initial remediation. While transparency is important, bypassing internal processes for initial assessment and remediation can be inefficient and may lead to premature or inaccurate reporting. It also fails to demonstrate the organization's commitment to self-governance and proactive security management, which are implicit in many regulatory frameworks. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Verify the finding. Confirm the accuracy and scope of the security alert. 2. Assess the risk and impact. Understand the potential consequences of the compliance gap. 3. Document the issue. Maintain a clear record of the finding, its assessment, and proposed actions. 4. Consult internal policies and procedures. Ensure actions align with organizational guidelines. 5. Develop a remediation plan. Outline steps for addressing the gap, prioritizing based on risk. 6. Communicate with stakeholders. Inform relevant parties about the issue and the plan. 7. Implement remediation. Execute the plan, ideally in a phased manner to minimize disruption. 8. Monitor and verify. Ensure the remediation is effective and the gap is closed. This systematic approach ensures that security and compliance are addressed effectively and responsibly, upholding professional ethics and regulatory requirements. Question 5. What factors determine the optimal selection and configuration of CloudWatch metrics for collecting and analyzing security-relevant data within an AWS environment, adhering strictly to U.S. regulatory frameworks and best practices for process optimization? Option A. A predefined, static list of commonly used security metrics that are applied uniformly across all AWS accounts and environments without regard for specific workloads. Option B. The total number of available CloudWatch metrics for all AWS services in use, regardless of their direct security relevance, to ensure maximum data coverage. Option C. The perceived complexity of integrating metrics from third-party security solutions with CloudWatch, prioritizing native AWS metrics even if they offer less granular security insights. Option D. The specific security threats and compliance requirements relevant to the deployed applications and data, the criticality of the monitored resources, and the cost-effectiveness of collecting and retaining specific metric data. Correct answer is D. The specific security threats and compliance requirements relevant to the deployed applications and data, the criticality of the monitored resources, and the cost-effectiveness of collecting and retaining specific metric data. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for granular security monitoring with the operational costs and complexity of managing a large volume of CloudWatch metrics. Overcollection can lead to excessive costs and alert fatigue, while undercollection can leave critical security gaps undetected. Careful judgment is required to select metrics that provide actionable security insights without overwhelming resources. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principle of least privilege and efficient resource utilization, which are fundamental to secure and cost-effective cloud operation. By focusing on metrics directly related to security events and potential threats, organizations can ensure that their monitoring efforts are targeted and effective. This approach also supports compliance by enabling the demonstration of due diligence in security monitoring, as required by various regulatory frameworks that mandate logging and auditing of security-relevant events. An incorrect approach that involves collecting all available metrics indiscriminately is professionally unacceptable. This leads to significant cost inefficiencies and can obscure critical security events within a deluge of data, hindering timely incident response. Ethically, it represents a failure to manage resources responsibly. From a regulatory perspective, it may not satisfy requirements for effective security monitoring, as the sheer volume of data makes it difficult to identify and act upon genuine threats, potentially violating mandates for proactive threat detection and incident management. Another incorrect approach, collecting only a minimal set of generic metrics, is also professionally unacceptable. This creates significant security blind spots. It fails to capture the nuances of potential threats specific to the deployed services and configurations. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of commitment to robust security. Regulatory failures arise from the inability to detect and respond to sophisticated attacks or policy violations, which could lead to non-compliance with data protection and security standards that require comprehensive monitoring. A third incorrect approach, relying solely on third-party security tools without integrating their metrics into CloudWatch, is professionally unsound. While third-party tools offer valuable insights, their data needs to be correlated with native cloud metrics for a holistic security posture. Failing to integrate means missing crucial context and potential interdependencies between cloud infrastructure events and security tool findings. This can lead to incomplete incident investigations and a false sense of security, violating the principle of comprehensive security oversight and potentially failing to meet regulatory requirements for integrated security monitoring. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based assessment. This means identifying critical assets and potential threats, then determining which CloudWatch metrics provide the most relevant and actionable data for detecting and responding to those threats. It also involves understanding the cost implications of metric collection and retention, and establishing clear thresholds for alerting and investigation. Regular review and refinement of the metric collection strategy are essential to adapt to evolving threats in cloud environments. Question 6. When evaluating the most secure method for an EC2 instance to access AWS services like S3 for data processing, which approach best adheres to the principle of least privilege and minimizes the risk of credential compromise within the AWS Certified Security Specialty exam's regulatory context? Option A. Embed long-lived AWS Access Key ID and Secret Access Key directly into the application configuration files on the EC2 instance. Option B. Generate individual IAM user credentials for each EC2 instance and manage their rotation manually through a separate secure process. Option C. Create an IAM role with a granular policy granting only the necessary S3 read and write permissions, and associate this role with the EC2 instance. Option D. Create a dedicated IAM user for the EC2 instance and assign it broad administrative privileges across all AWS services. The correct answer is C. Create an IAM role with a granular policy granting only the necessary S3 read and write permissions, and associate this role with the EC2 instance. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, balancing operational agility with robust security controls for sensitive workloads. The core difficulty lies in granting necessary permissions to an application or service without inadvertently exposing sensitive data or resources to unauthorized access. This requires a nuanced understanding of IAM principles, specifically the principle of least privilege, and how to implement it effectively within AWS. The correct approach leverages IAM roles, which are designed for this exact purpose. By creating an IAM role with a specific, limited set of permissions and attaching it to the EC2 instance, you adhere to the principle of least privilege. This ensures that the instance only has the permissions it absolutely needs to perform its function, minimizing the blast radius in case of a compromise. This aligns with best practices for cloud security and is implicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that mandate data protection and access control, such as those that might be referenced in a US-centric AWS security context, e.g., NIST guidelines which emphasize least privilege. An incorrect approach would be to embed long-lived access keys directly into the application code or configuration files. This is a significant security risk because access keys are essentially long-term credentials. If these keys are compromised, an attacker gains direct access to the AWS account with the permissions associated with those keys. This violates the principle of least privilege and creates an unacceptable security posture, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance with data protection mandates. Another incorrect approach would be to grant broad administrative privileges to the EC2 instances, IAM user or role. This is the antithesis of least privilege. Such broad permissions would allow the instance to perform any action within the AWS account, including deleting resources, modifying security settings, or accessing highly sensitive data, even if the application itself does not require such extensive access. This creates an enormous security vulnerability and would be a clear failure to implement adequate access controls as expected by security best practices and regulatory oversight. Finally, creating a separate IAM user for each EC2 instance and assigning it static credentials would be inefficient and insecure. Managing individual user credentials for a large fleet of instances is operationally burdensome and prone to errors. Furthermore, if these credentials are not rotated regularly and securely, they become stale and vulnerable, similar to the risks associated with embedded access keys. This approach fails to leverage the inherent security benefits of IAM roles for service-to-service authentication. The professional decision-making process should always start with identifying the specific task or function the resource, in this case, the EC2 instance, needs to perform. Then, determine the absolute minimum set of permissions required for that task. This leads to the creation of a custom IAM policy that grants only those necessary permissions. This policy is then attached to an IAM role, which is subsequently assumed by the EC2 instance. This systematic approach ensures that security is built into the architecture from the outset, adhering to the principle of least privilege and minimizing potential attack vectors. Question 7. The performance metrics show an increasing number of security findings across multiple AWS accounts and services, including Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, and AWS Firewall Manager. But the security team is struggling to gain a consolidated view of the overall security posture and prioritize remediation efforts effectively. What is the most effective approach to address this challenge and ensure ongoing regulatory compliance? Option A. Configure AWS Security Hub to aggregate security findings from all relevant AWS services and supported third-party security tools, enabling centralized visibility and automated compliance checks against security standards. Option B. Implement custom scripts to poll each AWS service for security findings and generate reports without integrating them into a central management platform. Option C. Focus solely on addressing compliance checks reported by individual AWS services, without a unified mechanism to correlate findings or assess the overall security risk. Option D. Manually collect and consolidate security findings from each individual AWS service console and third-party tool into a shared spreadsheet for review by the security team. The correct answer is A. Configure AWS Security Hub to aggregate security findings from all relevant AWS services and supported third-party security tools, enabling centralized visibility and automated compliance checks against security standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, maintaining continuous compliance and visibility across a distributed AWS environment. The professional challenge lies in effectively aggregating and acting upon security findings from various AWS services to meet regulatory obligations. Without a centralized mechanism, security teams risk fragmented visibility, delayed remediation, and potential non-compliance with industry standards and AWS best practices. The correct approach leverages AWS Security Hub to centralize security findings from various AWS services and supported third-party products. This provides a unified view of the security posture, enabling efficient prioritization and remediation of security issues. This aligns with the principle of proactive security management and demonstrates due diligence in meeting compliance requirements, as regulatory frameworks often mandate comprehensive security monitoring and incident response capabilities. By consolidating findings, organizations can more effectively demonstrate adherence to security controls and audit requirements. An incorrect approach that relies solely on individual AWS service consoles for security monitoring fails to provide a holistic view. This leads to a fragmented security posture, making it difficult to identify overarching risks and prioritize remediation efforts effectively. This fragmentation can result in missed critical findings and a failure to meet the spirit, if not the letter, of compliance mandates that require a comprehensive understanding of the security landscape. Another incorrect approach that involves manually aggregating findings from disparate sources is inefficient and prone to human error. This manual process is not scalable and introduces significant delays in identifying and responding to security threats, which can be a direct violation of compliance requirements that emphasize timely incident detection and response. Furthermore, it fails to establish a repeatable and auditable process for security posture management. A third incorrect approach that focuses only on compliance checks without integrating them into a broader security operational workflow overlooks the dynamic nature of cloud security. Compliance is not a static state, but an ongoing process. Failing to integrate compliance findings with operational security workflows means that identified vulnerabilities may not be addressed promptly, leading to a sustained period of non-compliance and increased risk exposure. The professional reasoning process should involve understanding the organization's specific regulatory obligations, and then identifying AWS services that best support meeting those obligations. In this context, AWS Security Hub is a foundational service for centralized security posture management and compliance reporting. Professionals should prioritize solutions that offer automation, integration, and a consolidated view of security data to ensure efficient and effective security operations and compliance adherence. Question 8. System analysis indicates that a security analyst reviewing VPC flow logs has identified network traffic patterns that are unusual and potentially indicative of policy circumvention, but not explicitly forbidden by the current acceptable use policy AWP. The analyst is concerned about both potential security risks and user privacy. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately share the raw VPC flow logs data with all department heads to inform them of the unusual network activity. Option B. Consult the organization's acceptable use policy and data privacy guidelines to determine if the observed traffic violates any established rules or principles, and if not, proceed with further investigation using anonymized or aggregated data, or consult with the security team lead or privacy officer. Option C. Ignore the observation as the traffic is not explicitly listed as prohibited in the AUP, assuming it poses no immediate security risk. Option D. Escalate the observation directly to all affected users and their managers, informing them of the potential policy violation. The correct answer is B. Consult the organization's acceptable use policy and data privacy guidelines to determine if the observed traffic violates any established rules or principles, and if not, proceed with further investigation using anonymized or aggregated data, or consult with the security team lead or privacy officer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents an ethical dilemma where a security analyst discovers potentially sensitive but not explicitly prohibited network traffic patterns during a routine VPC flow logs analysis. The challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security monitoring and threat detection with the privacy implications of scrutinizing user activity. The analyst must decide whether to escalate this observation, potentially impacting user privacy or causing unnecessary alarm, or to dismiss it, risking the overlooking of a nascent security threat or policy violation. This requires careful judgment, a thorough understanding of organizational policies, and an awareness of relevant regulatory frameworks governing data privacy and security. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a measured and policy-driven response. It prioritizes adherence to established organizational security policies and data handling procedures. By first consulting the organization's acceptable use policy AWP and data privacy guidelines, the analyst ensures their actions align with approved practices. If the observed traffic patterns do not violate the AUP, the next step is to investigate further using anonymized or aggregated data where possible, or to consult with the security team lead or a designated privacy officer. This approach upholds professional responsibility by seeking to identify potential security risks without infringing on user privacy unnecessarily, and by following established governance structures. It demonstrates a commitment to both security and ethical data handling, which is crucial in regulated environments. Incorrect approaches analysis. Immediately escalating the observation to all affected users or their managers without prior investigation or policy review is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action constitutes an overreach, potentially violating privacy regulations and organizational policies regarding the disclosure of sensitive information. It can lead to unwarranted suspicion, damage employee morale, and create legal liabilities for the organization. Ignoring the observation entirely because the traffic is not explicitly listed as prohibited in the AUP is also professionally unacceptable. While the AUP provides a baseline, security professionals have an ethical and often regulatory obligation to investigate anomalous or potentially suspicious activity that could indicate a security threat or policy circumvention, even if not explicitly defined as forbidden. This inaction risks overlooking critical security vulnerabilities or policy violations, potentially leading to data breaches or other security incidents. Sharing the raw VPC flow logs data with other departments or individuals outside of the authorized security and compliance teams without a clear business need or proper authorization is a breach of data governance and privacy principles. This unauthorized disclosure can violate data protection regulations and organizational policies, leading to severe consequences, including legal penalties and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should employ a structured decision-making process. First, understand the scope of the observation and its potential impact. Second, consult relevant organizational policies, including security policies, AWP, and data privacy guidelines. Third, assess the observation against these policies to determine if a violation has occurred or if further investigation is warranted. Fourth, if further investigation is needed, utilize appropriate tools and techniques, prioritizing data anonymization and aggregation to protect privacy. Fifth, escalate findings through established channels, involving legal, compliance, or privacy officers as necessary, and always document actions taken. This systematic approach ensures that security measures are implemented responsibly, ethically, and in compliance with all applicable regulations. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that a large enterprise is migrating a significant portion of its infrastructure to AWS and needs to establish consistent security guardrails across all its AWS accounts. The primary objective is to prevent the creation of publicly accessible S3 buckets and to restrict the use of specific high-risk EC2 instance types across all member accounts within its AWS organization. The security team is tasked with implementing these controls at the organizational level, which approach best enforces these security requirements while adhering to the principle of least privilege and enabling effective governance. Option A. Implement an allow-all SCP at the root of the AWS organization, and then create specific deny policies for publicly accessible S3 buckets and the prohibited EC2 instance types. Option B. Configure AWS config rules to detect and report on publicly accessible S3 buckets and the use of prohibited EC2 instance types, relying on account-level IAM policies for enforcement. Option C. Implement service control policies, SCP, at the root of the AWS organization that deny the creation of S3 buckets with public access enabled and deny the launch of EC2 instances of the specified high-risk types. All other actions are implicitly denied by the SCP structure, requiring explicit allow statements for other services as needed. Option D. Create IAM policies within each member account that deny the creation of publicly accessible S3 buckets and the launch of specific EC2 instance types. The correct answer is C. Implement service control policies, SCP, at the root of the AWS organization that deny the creation of S3 buckets with public access enabled and deny the launch of EC2 instances of the specified high-risk types. All other actions are implicitly denied by the SCP structure, requiring explicit allow statements for other services as needed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing robust security controls with the operational needs of a large, dynamic organization. Implementing service control policies, SCP, at the AWS organization's level introduces a broad impact, meaning a misconfiguration can inadvertently lock down critical services or grant excessive permissions across all accounts. The challenge lies in defining policies that are both restrictive enough to enforce security baselines and flexible enough to allow legitimate business operations, all while adhering to the principle of least privilege. The complexity increases with the potential for conflicting policies between different organizational units and the need for continuous monitoring and auditing to ensure compliance and effectiveness. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased, granular implementation of SCPs, starting with a deny-all policy, and then explicitly allowing necessary services and actions. This aligns with the principle of least privilege, a fundamental tenet of cloud security, and a best practice mandated by various regulatory frameworks that emphasize minimizing attack surfaces and unauthorized access. By denying all by default, the organization establishes a strong security posture. Subsequently, allowing only specific services and actions for defined use cases ensures that access is granted only where absolutely required. This method is auditable, manageable, and significantly reduces the risk of overpermissioning. It also facilitates a clear understanding of what is permitted and what is denied, simplifying troubleshooting and compliance checks. This approach directly supports the security objectives of preventing unauthorized resource creation, modification, or deletion, which are critical for maintaining the integrity and availability of cloud environments. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that begins with an allow-all policy and then attempts to deny specific services is fundamentally flawed from a security perspective. This allow-first strategy creates a wide-open environment initially, increasing the risk of accidental or malicious resource creation and access before any restrictions are applied. It is far more difficult to identify and deny all potentially harmful actions than it is to explicitly allow only known good actions. This approach is ethically questionable as it prioritizes ease of initial setup over robust security, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks. Another incorrect approach is to implement broad, overly permissive SCPs that grant access to entire categories of services without granular control. For example, allowing all EC2 actions across all accounts without specifying instance types, regions, or specific API calls. This violates the principle of least privilege and creates a large attack surface. It makes it difficult to audit effectively and increases the likelihood of unauthorized or unintended resource usage, which can lead to compliance violations and increased operational costs. Finally, an approach that relies solely on IAM policies within individual accounts, without leveraging SCPs for organizational-level guardrails, is insufficient for comprehensive security governance. While IAM policies are crucial for fine-grained access control within an account, SCPs provide a higher-level enforcement mechanism that prevents even root users in member accounts from overriding security baselines. Without SCPs, an administrator in a member account could potentially weaken security controls, undermining the overall security posture of the organization. This failure to implement organizational-level controls is a significant security and governance gap. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes security by design. This involves understanding the organization's security objectives, regulatory requirements, and operational needs. The process should begin with a comprehensive risk assessment to identify critical assets and potential threats. For SCP, the principle of least privilege should guide policy creation, starting with the most restrictive stance, deny all, and incrementally allowing only necessary actions. Regular review and auditing of SCPs, along with continuous monitoring for policy violations, are essential components of a mature cloud security program. This iterative approach ensures that security controls evolve with the organization's changing landscape while maintaining a strong defense. Question 10. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of an organization's data landscape and regulatory obligations before implementing a data loss prevention solution like Amazon Macy. Considering the need for effective data security and compliance, what is the most prudent approach to deploying Amazon Macy within a U.S.-regulated environment? Option A. Deploy Amazon Macy to monitor only S3 buckets containing data that is actively being modified or accessed frequently. Option B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to identify sensitive data types, their locations, and relevant regulatory requirements. Then configure Macy to prioritize discovery and alerting based on this assessment. Option C. Configure Amazon Macy to scan only the S3 buckets with the lowest storage costs to minimize operational expenses. Option D. Immediately enable all Amazon Macy discovery features across all S3 buckets to ensure maximum visibility and data coverage from the outset. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough impact assessment to identify sensitive data types, their locations, and relevant regulatory requirements. Then configure Macy to prioritize discovery and alerting based on this assessment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing robust data security measures with operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness, all while adhering to stringent regulatory compliance. The rapid evolution of cloud services and the increasing sophistication of data threats necessitate a proactive and informed approach to data protection. Misjudging the impact of a DLP solution can lead to either overspending on unnecessary features or, more critically, failing to adequately protect sensitive data, resulting in regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. Implementing Amazon Macy with a focus on impact assessment before full deployment represents best professional practice. This approach aligns with the principle of least privilege and risk-based security. By first understanding the types and locations of sensitive data, the potential impact of a breach, and the specific regulatory requirements, e.g., HIPAA, PCI DSS, GDPR if applicable within the AWS Certified Security Specialty Exams assumed U.S. jurisdiction context. Organizations can tailor Macy's configuration for maximum effectiveness and efficiency. This ensures that sensitive data is identified and protected according to its criticality and regulatory obligations, avoiding unnecessary alerts and resource consumption. This proactive assessment minimizes the risk of data exposure and ensures compliance with data protection mandates. Incorrect approaches analysis. Deploying Amazon Macy without any prior assessment and enabling all discovery features immediately is professionally unacceptable. This approach leads to a fire hose of alerts, overwhelming security teams and potentially masking critical findings. It also incurs unnecessary costs for scanning data that may not be sensitive or subject to specific regulations. This violates the principle of efficient resource allocation and can lead to alert fatigue, a common cause of security incidents. From a regulatory perspective, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding data sensitivity and risk, which could be a factor in assessing compliance failures. Configuring Amazon Macy solely based on the lowest cost of storage, without considering the sensitivity or regulatory classification of the data, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach prioritizes cost savings over security and compliance. Sensitive data, regardless of its storage cost, requires appropriate protection. Failing to identify and secure regulated data, like PII or PHI, based on storage cost alone would directly violate data protection laws and industry standards, leading to severe penalties. Focusing Amazon Macy's deployment only on data that is actively being modified, ignoring static or infrequently accessed data, is professionally unsound. Sensitive data can reside in any state, and attackers may target older, less protected datasets. This selective approach creates blind spots, leaving critical information vulnerable to exfiltration or unauthorized access. It fails to provide a comprehensive view of data security posture and neglects potential compliance gaps for data at rest. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a phased and risk-informed approach. This involves 1. Data discovery and classification. Understand what sensitive data exists and where it resides. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential impact of a data breach for different data types. 3. Regulatory mapping. Identify applicable regulations and their specific requirements for data protection. 4. Tool configuration. Configure Amazon Macy or any DLP tool based on the findings from steps 1-3, prioritizing the most critical data and compliance requirements. 5. Continuous monitoring and refinement. Regularly review Macy findings, adjust configurations, and stay updated on evolving threats and regulations. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates a need to proactively identify and respond to unusual API call activity within the AWS environment that may indicate a security breach or operational misconfiguration. Which approach best addresses this requirement by leveraging AWS native capabilities for anomaly detection? Option A. Configure CloudWatch alarms to trigger only when specific, predefined API call error rates are exceeded. Option B. Integrate third-party security tools with AWS, but do not rely on native AWS logging for anomaly detection. Option C. Enable CloudTrail Insights to automatically detect and alert on anomalous API call activity. Option D. Implement a manual process for reviewing all CloudTrail logs daily to identify any unusual patterns. The correct answer is C. Enable CloudTrail Insights to automatically detect and alert on anomalous API call activity. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security operations, identifying and responding to anomalous activity that might indicate a security incident. The difficulty lies in distinguishing genuine threats from benign deviations, especially in dynamic cloud environments. The sheer volume of logs generated by AWS services, coupled with the potential for sophisticated attackers to mimic normal behavior, necessitates a robust and intelligent detection mechanism. The professional challenge is to leverage AWS services effectively to gain visibility into these anomalies without succumbing to alert fatigue or missing critical indicators. Correct approach analysis. Leveraging CloudTrail Insights is the best professional practice because it is specifically designed by AWS to detect unusual API call activity. It analyzes CloudTrail management events to identify deviations from normal patterns, such as spikes in specific API calls, unusual error rates, or activity at unusual times. This proactive detection mechanism is crucial for identifying potential security threats or operational issues early. By enabling CloudTrail Insights, security teams can receive automated alerts for these anomalies, allowing for timely investigation and response, which aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, and helps meet compliance requirements for monitoring and incident detection. Incorrect approaches analysis. Manually reviewing all CloudTrail logs for unusual activity is professionally unacceptable due to its impracticality and inefficiency. The volume of logs makes manual review a Sisyphean task, prone to human error, and highly susceptible to missing subtle anomalies. This approach fails to meet the standard of due diligence expected in security operations and could lead to significant delays in incident detection, potentially violating regulatory requirements for timely breach notification and mitigation. Configuring CloudWatch alarms solely on specific, predefined API call error rates without considering broader behavioral patterns is also professionally deficient. Useful for known issues, this approach is reactive and will not detect novel or sophisticated attack vectors that might not trigger specific error thresholds. It lacks the intelligence to identify deviations from normal operational baselines, leaving the environment vulnerable to unknown threats and failing to provide comprehensive security monitoring. Relying exclusively on third-party security tools without integrating them with AWS native logging services like CloudTrail is a suboptimal approach. While third-party tools can offer valuable insights, they often lack the deep integration and context that native AWS services provide. Without correlating their findings with CloudTrail data, security teams may miss critical AWS-specific anomalies or struggle to perform effective root cause analysis, potentially leading to incomplete incident response and noncompliance with security best practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a layered security approach that prioritizes intelligent automation for anomaly detection. The decision-making framework involves 1. Understanding the threat landscape and potential attack vectors relevant to the AWS environment. 2. Identifying and enabling AWS services designed for proactive threat detection, such as CloudTrail Insights. 3. Establishing clear incident response playbooks triggered by alerts from these services. 4. Regularly reviewing and tuning detection mechanisms to minimize false positives and ensure comprehensive coverage. 5. Ensuring that all security monitoring and detection activities align with relevant regulatory and compliance obligations. Question 12. The assessment process reveals that the organization is struggling to demonstrate continuous monitoring of its AWS environment to meet specific regulatory compliance requirements for data security and incident response. The current setup involves extensive logging, but lacks automated alerts for critical security events. Which of the following approaches would best satisfy the regulatory mandate for proactive detection and timely notification of security incidents within the AWS environment? Option A. Configure CloudWatch alarms to trigger notifications via Amazon SNS for specific security-related metrics and log events that indicate potential policy violations or security threats. Option B. Implement CloudWatch logs insights queries to analyze security logs, with these queries being executed manually by analysts on a weekly schedule. Option C. Create detailed CloudWatch dashboards that visually represent security log data, requiring manual review by the security team on a daily basis. Option D. Set up CloudWatch events, event bridge rules, to capture all security-related API calls for audit purposes, without configuring any immediate notification or alerting mechanisms. The correct answer is A. Configure CloudWatch alarms to trigger notifications via Amazon SNS for specific security-related metrics and log events that indicate potential policy violations or security threats. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, ensuring continuous monitoring and alerting for compliance with regulatory requirements, specifically within the AWS environment. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most effective and compliant method for detecting and responding to security events that could impact data integrity and availability, as mandated by various security frameworks. The need for timely detection and notification is paramount to minimize potential breaches and maintain operational resilience. Correct approach analysis. Implementing CloudWatch alarms that trigger notifications via SNS for specific security-related metrics and log events represents best professional practice. This approach directly aligns with the principle of proactive security monitoring and incident response, which is a cornerstone of most regulatory frameworks governing data security and privacy. By configuring alarms based on predefined thresholds for critical security events, e.g., unauthorized access attempts, configuration changes to security groups, unusual API activity, organizations can ensure timely awareness of potential threats. The integration with SNS ensures that relevant personnel are alerted promptly, enabling swift investigation and remediation, thereby fulfilling compliance obligations for incident detection and reporting. This method is efficient, scalable, and leverages native AWS services for robust security oversight. Incorrect approaches analysis. Configuring CloudWatch dashboards to display security logs without associated alarms fails to meet the requirement for proactive detection and alerting. Dashboards are excellent for visualization and trend analysis, but do not inherently trigger notifications upon detecting anomalous or critical events. Relying solely on manual dashboard review is reactive and significantly increases the risk of delayed incident response, which is a direct violation of many regulatory mandates requiring timely detection and notification of security incidents. Creating CloudWatch logs insights queries that are only run manually on a periodic basis is also insufficient. While logs insights is powerful for querying and analyzing logs, manual execution lacks the automated, real-time monitoring necessary for effective security. This approach introduces significant delays in detecting security events, making it impossible to meet the rapid response requirements stipulated by compliance standards. It is a reactive measure that does not provide the continuous oversight expected for sensitive data. Setting up CloudWatch events, now event bridge rules, to capture all security-related API calls, but not configuring any notification mechanism or alarm is incomplete. While capturing the events is a good first step for auditing and analysis, the absence of an alerting mechanism means that critical security events might go unnoticed until manual review, which, as discussed, is not a compliant or secure practice for real-time threat detection. This approach misses the crucial step of operationalizing the captured data into actionable intelligence. Professional reasoning. When faced with regulatory compliance requirements for security monitoring in AWS, professionals should prioritize solutions that offer automated, real-time detection and alerting. The decision-making process should involve identifying critical security metrics and log patterns that indicate potential non-compliance or security incidents. Subsequently, these should be translated into CloudWatch alarms configured to trigger notifications through services like SNS. This ensures that security teams are immediately aware of and can respond to threats, aligning with the principles of continuous monitoring and incident management mandated by regulatory bodies. The focus should always be on proactive detection and rapid response, rather than retrospective analysis or passive observation. Question 13. Process analysis reveals that AWS Guard Duty has generated a finding indicating potential unauthorized access to an S3 bucket. The security team needs to determine the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure compliance with security best practices and regulatory requirements. Which of the following actions best aligns with a professional and compliant security response? Option A. Classify the guard duty finding as low priority due to the absence of immediate alerts from other monitoring systems and defer investigation until a later scheduled security review. Option B. Automatically trigger a script to revoke all access permissions to the affected S3 bucket to prevent any further unauthorized access, assuming the finding indicates a critical threat. Option C. Immediately initiate a detailed investigation into the S3 bucket access logs, correlating the guard duty finding with other relevant security logs, and consult the organization's incident response plan to determine the scope and impact before implementing any remediation actions. Option D. Isolate the EC2 instance identified in the guard duty finding from the network to contain any potential compromise, without further investigation of the S3 bucket itself. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a detailed investigation into the S3 bucket access logs, correlating the guard duty finding with other relevant security logs, and consult the organization's incident response plan to determine the scope and impact before implementing any remediation actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, responding to automated threat detection findings in a way that balances immediate remediation with the need for thorough investigation and adherence to compliance requirements. The professional challenge lies in efficiently and effectively addressing potential security incidents without causing undue disruption or violating regulatory mandates. Careful judgment is required to prioritize actions, gather necessary evidence, and ensure that the response aligns with established security policies and legal obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based response that is directly tied to the specific threat identified by guard duty. By initiating an investigation, gathering relevant logs, and consulting security policies, the security team ensures that their actions are informed and justifiable. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible incident response, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks governing data security and privacy. The focus on understanding the scope and impact of the finding before taking irreversible actions is crucial for minimizing collateral damage and ensuring that remediation efforts are targeted and effective. This methodical approach also facilitates auditability and compliance reporting, as it creates a clear record of the incident and the steps taken to address it. An incorrect approach that immediately isolates all affected resources without investigation fails to acknowledge the potential for false positives or misconfigurations within guard duty. This can lead to unnecessary service disruption, impacting business operations and potentially violating service-level agreements. Ethically, it represents an overreaction that could cause significant harm without sufficient justification. From a regulatory perspective, such an indiscriminate response might not be considered a proportionate or appropriate security measure, and could even lead to accusations of negligence if it causes undue harm. Another incorrect approach that involves solely relying on automated remediation scripts without human oversight or validation is also professionally unacceptable. While automation is valuable, it can sometimes miss nuances or context that a human analyst would recognize. This can lead to incorrect remediation, potentially exacerbating the security issue or creating new vulnerabilities. It also bypasses the critical step of understanding the threat, which is essential for long-term security posture improvement. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply professional judgment. Regulatory frameworks often expect a level of human oversight in critical security decisions, especially when dealing with potential data breaches or system compromises. A third incorrect approach that involves ignoring the guard duty finding due to a perceived low severity is a direct violation of professional responsibility and regulatory expectations. All security findings, regardless of initial perceived severity, warrant investigation. Ignoring potential threats, even minor ones, can allow them to escalate into significant security incidents. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to a proactive security posture and a disregard for potential risks. Ethically, it is negligent. From a regulatory standpoint, it represents a failure to implement reasonable security measures and a potential breach of compliance obligations, as many regulations require organizations to actively monitor for and respond to security threats. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach. First, understand the finding and its context. Second, assess the potential impact and severity. Third, consult relevant security policies and procedures. Fourth, initiate an appropriate investigation and gather evidence. Fifth, implement targeted remediation based on the investigation's findings. And finally, document all actions taken for audit and review. This structured approach ensures that responses are proportionate, effective, and compliant. Question 14. Performance analysis shows that Amazon Inspector has identified a significant number of vulnerabilities across various AWS resources, including critical EC2 instances running production workloads and less critical development environments. The findings range from critical severity vulnerabilities like remote code execution flaws to informational findings related to outdated software versions. The security team has limited resources and needs to establish an effective and efficient remediation strategy. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional security best practices for managing these Amazon Inspector findings in a production AWS environment? Option A. Implement automated remediation for all identified vulnerabilities without human review to ensure the fastest possible resolution across the entire AWS environment. Option B. Focus solely on remediating vulnerabilities identified on critical EC2 instances, as these are the most likely targets for attackers, and ignore findings on less critical resources to conserve resources. Option C. Immediately remediate all critical and high-severity vulnerabilities across all environments, deferring low and informational findings until all higher-severity issues are resolved. Option D. Prioritize remediation efforts based on the severity of the vulnerability, the criticality of the affected AWS resource, and the potential business impact, while establishing a schedule for addressing lower-severity findings. The correct answer is C. Immediately remediate all critical and high-severity vulnerabilities across all environments, deferring low and informational findings until all higher-severity issues are resolved. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security operations, balancing the need for comprehensive vulnerability assessment with the operational realities of a dynamic production environment. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the findings of Amazon Inspector, a critical security tool, and translating them into actionable remediation steps without causing undue disruption to business-critical applications. The sheer volume of findings, coupled with varying severity levels, necessitates a structured and risk-based approach to prioritization, ensuring that the most critical vulnerabilities are addressed first. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes remediation based on the severity of the vulnerability and its potential impact on the affected resource, aligning with best practices for risk management and compliance. Amazon Inspector's findings are designed to inform security posture, and a risk-based prioritization directly supports the principle of managing security risks to an acceptable level. This approach ensures that limited security resources are focused on the most impactful threats, thereby enhancing the overall security of the AWS environment. This aligns with general principles of information security risk management, which are implicitly expected within the AWS Certified Security Specialty Exam scope, focusing on practical application of security controls and processes within the AWS ecosystem. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to attempt to remediate every single finding reported by Amazon Inspector immediately, regardless of severity or context. This approach fails to acknowledge the practical limitations of resources and the potential for causing service disruptions. It represents a failure in risk management by treating all vulnerabilities as equally critical, leading to inefficient allocation of security efforts and potentially impacting business operations unnecessarily. Ethically, it could be seen as a failure to exercise professional judgment in prioritizing security tasks. Another incorrect approach is to ignore findings categorized as informational or low severity. While these may not pose an immediate critical threat, a complete disregard for them can lead to a gradual erosion of security posture over time. This approach fails to embrace a proactive security mindset and can result in overlooking vulnerabilities that, when combined with other factors, could become significant risks. From a compliance perspective, depending on the specific regulatory framework, which for this exam is US-centric, implying adherence to standards like NIST or CIS benchmarks. A comprehensive approach to vulnerability management often requires addressing all identified weaknesses, even those with lower initial impact. A third incorrect approach is to solely rely on automated remediation without human oversight for all findings. While automation is crucial for efficiency, critical vulnerabilities, or those impacting complex configurations, require careful human review to ensure that remediation actions do not inadvertently break applications or introduce new security flaws. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can lead to unintended consequences, potentially violating the principle of least privilege or introducing misconfigurations that create new attack vectors. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to vulnerability management. This involves understanding the context of each finding, assessing its severity and potential impact, and prioritizing remediation efforts accordingly. A structured process should be in place for reviewing inspector findings, categorizing them by risk, and assigning ownership for remediation. Regular communication with development and operations teams is essential to ensure timely and effective remediation without compromising service availability. This systematic approach ensures that security investments are aligned with business objectives and that the organization maintains a strong and resilient security posture. Question 15. Stakeholder feedback indicates that current infrastructure security controls are significantly impeding the speed and efficiency of application development and deployment cycles within the AWS environment. The development teams are requesting more flexibility to test and iterate on new features without encountering constant security roadblocks. The security team, however, is concerned about maintaining a strong security posture and preventing unauthorized access or data exfiltration. What is the most effective approach to address this feedback while upholding robust security principles? Option A. Disable AWS Web Application Firewall (WAF) rules for all development and staging environments to allow unrestricted inbound traffic for testing purposes. Option B. Configure strict network access control lists (NACL) to deny all inbound traffic to development environments, only permitting access from a limited static list of approved IP addresses. Option C. Implement AWS Security Hub with custom compliance checks that align with the organization's security policies and regulatory requirements, enabling continuous monitoring and targeted remediation. Option D. Implement a default IAM policy that denies all API access to development accounts, requiring explicit individual permissions for every action. The correct answer is C. Implement AWS Security Hub with custom compliance checks that align with the organization's security policies and regulatory requirements, enabling continuous monitoring and targeted remediation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in cloud security, balancing robust infrastructure security with the operational needs of development teams. Stakeholders are expressing frustration with security controls that hinder their ability to rapidly deploy and test new features. This creates a tension between the security team's mandate to protect the AWS environment and the business's need for agility. The challenge lies in identifying security solutions that are both effective and minimally disruptive, requiring a deep understanding of AWS security services and their integration points. Correct approach analysis. Implementing AWS Security Hub with custom compliance checks tailored to the organization's specific security policies and regulatory requirements represents best professional practice. Security Hub acts as a central dashboard for security findings from various AWS services and integrated third-party tools. By creating custom compliance checks, the security team can proactively identify deviations from their defined security posture without necessarily blocking development workflows entirely. This approach allows for continuous monitoring and reporting, enabling the security team to address non-compliance issues through education, remediation workflows, or policy adjustments, rather than outright obstruction. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth, ensuring that security is integrated into the development lifecycle without becoming a bottleneck. It also supports the principle of shared responsibility by providing visibility and actionable insights to both security and development teams. Incorrect approach is analysis. Disabling AWS WAF rules to allow all inbound traffic would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. AWS WAF is a critical component for protecting web applications from common web exploits. Disabling it exposes the application to a wide range of threats, violating the organization's duty to protect customer data and maintain the integrity of its services. This approach prioritizes operational convenience over fundamental security, leading to potential data breaches and reputational damage, which could have severe legal and financial repercussions. Implementing a broad, overly restrictive IAM policy that denies all API access to development accounts by default would also be a regulatory and ethical failure. While intended to enhance security, such a policy would completely halt development operations, directly contradicting the business's need for agility and innovation. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of the shared responsibility model and the importance of granular access control. It creates an adversarial relationship between security and development, hindering collaboration and potentially leading to shadow IT solutions to circumvent security controls, which are often less secure. Implementing a strict network access control list, NACL, that denies all inbound traffic to development environments except for specific, pre-approved IP addresses would be an overreach and a failure in professional decision-making. While NACL are a valid security control, a blanket denial without a clear, well-defined process for exceptions and dynamic adjustments would severely impede development and testing. This approach is inflexible and does not account for the dynamic nature of cloud development. It fails to consider the need for collaboration and rapid iteration, potentially leading to the development of insecure workarounds. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this challenge by first understanding the specific pain points identified by stakeholders. This involves active listening and a willingness to collaborate. The next step is to assess the current security posture and identify areas where controls are either too restrictive or insufficient. The decision-making process should involve evaluating AWS security services based on their ability to provide visibility, automated detection, and granular control, while minimizing operational impact. Prioritizing solutions that integrate with existing workflows and provide actionable insights is key. A phased approach to implementation, with clear communication and feedback loops with stakeholders, is crucial for success. The ultimate goal is to achieve a security posture that is both effective and enabling, fostering a culture of security ownership across the organization. Question 16. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual spike in outbound network traffic from an EC2 instance, accompanied by a guard duty finding indicating potential command and control C2 activity. Which approach would most effectively facilitate a rapid and comprehensive security investigation into this incident? Option A. Utilize Amazon Detective to ingest and analyze the guard duty finding, cloud trail logs, and VPC flow logs to visualize the relationship between these events and identify the root cause. Option B. Analyze VPC flow logs for the affected EC2 instance to understand the destination and volume of the outbound traffic. Option C. Manually review all raw cloud trail logs for the affected EC2 instance to identify any suspicious API calls. Option D. Rely solely on the guard duty finding to isolate the EC2 instance and await further alerts. Correct answer is C. Manually review all raw cloud trail logs for the affected EC2 instance to identify any suspicious API calls. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security, identifying the root cause of anomalous activity within a complex AWS environment. Difficulty lies in correlating disparate log sources and understanding the context of events to distinguish between legitimate operations and potential security incidents. A rapid and accurate investigation is critical to minimize potential damage, maintain compliance, and restore normal operations. The sheer volume of data and the interconnectedness of AWS services necessitate specialized tools for efficient analysis. Correct approach analysis. Leveraging Amazon Detective is the best professional practice in this scenario. Detective is specifically designed to ingest and analyze security data from various AWS services, including CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, and guard duty findings. It automatically builds a relationship graph of detected threats and suspicious activities, allowing security analysts to investigate security findings and conduct impact analysis more efficiently. This automated correlation and visualization significantly reduces the time and effort required to pinpoint the source and scope of a security event, aligning with the principle of timely incident response mandated by various security frameworks and best practices for cloud environments. Incorrect approaches analysis, manually sifting through raw CloudTrail logs without any correlation tools, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach is inefficient, prone to human error, and fails to meet the expected standard of care for incident response. It delays the identification of the threat, potentially leading to extended compromise and greater data loss, which could violate data protection regulations and breach contractual obligations regarding security. Attempting to analyze VPC flow logs in isolation without correlating them with other security findings is also professionally unacceptable. While flow logs provide network traffic data, they lack the context of what constitutes a security threat. Without integrating this data with threat intelligence or other security event logs, an analyst might miss critical indicators of compromise or misinterpret normal network activity as malicious, leading to either a missed incident or a false positive, both of which are detrimental to security posture and resource allocation. Relying solely on guard duty findings without further investigation is insufficient. Guard duty provides automated threat detection, but its findings are often high-level alerts. A thorough investigation requires understanding the context, scope, and potential impact of these findings, which is precisely what Amazon Detective facilitates. Ignoring the need for deeper analysis after an alert is raised can lead to an incomplete understanding of the incident, hindering effective remediation and potentially leaving vulnerabilities unaddressed, which is a failure in due diligence and risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a layered approach to security investigation. When an anomaly is detected, the first step is to leverage specialized tools like Amazon Detective that are designed for security data analysis and correlation. This allows for a rapid, data-driven understanding of the incident. If Detective's insights are insufficient, then deeper dives into specific log sources like CloudTrail and VPC flow logs can be performed, but always with the goal of corroborating or expanding upon the findings from the primary analysis tool. The decision-making process should prioritize efficiency, accuracy, and comprehensiveness to ensure timely and effective incident response, thereby upholding professional responsibilities and regulatory compliance. Question 17. The control framework reveals that a specific AWS service account requires access to an S3 bucket to perform object read operations. However, another IAM policy attached to the same service account explicitly denies all S3 object read operations. Considering the AWS IAM policy evaluation logic, what is the outcome for the service account attempting to read objects from the S3 bucket? Option A. Access will be granted if the explicit deny statement is not explicitly evaluated by the IAM system. Option B. The service account will be granted access to read objects from the S3 bucket. Option C. The service account will be denied access to read objects from the S3 bucket. Option D. Access will be granted only if the explicit allow statement is applied to the S3 bucket resource itself. The correct answer is C. The service account will be denied access to read objects from the S3 bucket. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of AWS IAM policy evaluation logic, specifically how explicit denies, explicit allows, and implicit denies interact. Misinterpreting this logic can lead to either overly permissive access, violating the principle of least privilege, and potentially leading to unauthorized data access or modification, or overly restrictive access, hindering legitimate business operations. The AWS Certified Security Specialty exam emphasizes the practical application of security principles within the AWS ecosystem, and correctly configuring IAM policies is fundamental to maintaining a secure cloud environment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core of IAM policy evaluation. By understanding that an explicit deny always overrides an explicit allow, and that any action not explicitly allowed is implicitly denied, security professionals can construct precise and secure policies. This aligns with regulatory requirements for access control and data protection, ensuring that only authorized entities can perform specific actions on AWS resources. Adhering to this logic is crucial for demonstrating due diligence in security posture management and for meeting compliance mandates that require robust access controls. An incorrect approach that relies solely on explicit allow statements without considering the potential for conflicting explicit deny statements in other policies would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to unintended access, violating data privacy regulations and potentially exposing sensitive information. Another incorrect approach, such as assuming that a lack of explicit deny means an action is allowed, directly contradicts the implicit deny principle, creating security gaps and failing to meet the standard of care expected in cloud security. Furthermore, an approach that ignores the order of evaluation or the precedence of different policy types, e.g., resource-based vs. identity-based, would result in unpredictable and insecure access controls, failing to meet the requirements of security best practices and potentially violating compliance frameworks that mandate predictable and auditable access mechanisms. Professionals should approach IAM policy configuration by first identifying the specific actions required for a given entity, user, role, service. Then, they should construct explicit allow statements for only those necessary actions. Crucially, they must then review all applicable policies, identity-based, resource-based, SCP, etc., to ensure no explicit deny statements conflict with the intended allows. If a conflict exists, the explicit deny will take precedence. Finally, they should confirm that any action not explicitly allowed is implicitly denied, thereby enforcing the principle of least privilege. This systematic process ensures that policies are both functional and secure, minimizing the attack surface and maintaining compliance. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates an increasing trend of external access to sensitive data stored in Amazon S3 buckets within the organization's AWS environment. To address this finding and ensure compliance with data protection regulations, what is the most effective and efficient approach to identify the specific S3 buckets and the entities granting this external access? Option A. Develop and deploy a custom script to periodically scan S3 bucket policies for indicators of public access. Option B. Enable AWS IAM Access Analyzer to continuously monitor and report on resource policies that grant external access to S3 buckets. Option C. Immediately disable all forms of external access to all S3 buckets across the entire AWS environment. Option D. Manually review AWS Cloud Trail logs for all S3 bucket access events, filtering for requests originating from outside the AWS account. The correct answer is B. Enable AWS IAM Access Analyzer to continuously monitor and report on resource policies that grant external access to S3 buckets. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security governance, ensuring that sensitive data remains protected from unauthorized external access. The complexity arises from the dynamic nature of cloud environments, where resource configurations can change, and the inherent difficulty in manually tracking all potential access paths. A governance review highlighting an increase in external access to S3 buckets necessitates a proactive and systematic approach to identify and remediate risks before they can be exploited. The challenge lies in efficiently and accurately pinpointing the exact sources of this external access and understanding the implications for data confidentiality and integrity. Correct approach analysis. Leveraging AWS IAM Access Analyzer is the best professional practice in this situation. IAM Access Analyzer is specifically designed to identify resources, such as S3 buckets, that are shared with external entities. It continuously monitors resource policies and provides a centralized view of what is shared and with whom. By enabling IAM Access Analyzer, security professionals can gain immediate visibility into the specific S3 buckets that have been configured to allow access from outside the AWS account. This directly addresses the governance review's finding by providing actionable intelligence for remediation. This approach aligns with the principle of least privilege and the shared responsibility model, where AWS provides tools to help customers manage their security posture. It is a proactive and automated method for detecting potential misconfigurations that could lead to data breaches, thus upholding regulatory compliance and ethical data handling standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. Manually reviewing cloud trail logs for every S3 bucket access event is an inefficient and error-prone method. While cloud trail logs provide valuable audit information, sifting through potentially vast amounts of data to identify external access patterns is a monumental task. This approach fails to leverage purpose-built security tools and is reactive rather than proactive. It also carries a high risk of missing critical events due to the sheer volume of data, leading to potential regulatory and ethical failures related to inadequate data protection and oversight. Implementing a custom script to scan S3 bucket policies for public access indicators is a partial solution, but lacks the comprehensive nature of IAM Access Analyzer. Custom scripts might miss nuanced sharing configurations or external principles that are not explicitly public, but still grant unintended external access. Furthermore, maintaining and updating such scripts to keep pace with evolving AWS features and security best practices is a significant operational burden. This approach can lead to regulatory noncompliance due to incomplete risk assessment and potential ethical lapses in data stewardship. Disabling all external access to S3 buckets without a thorough analysis is an overly restrictive and potentially disruptive approach. While it might seem like a quick fix, it can break legitimate business workflows and applications that rely on controlled external sharing. This blunt instrument approach fails to address the root cause of the governance reviews, finding understanding asterisk, why asterisk external access exists, and asterisk what asterisk specific resources are affected. It demonstrates a lack of nuanced security strategy and can lead to operational inefficiencies, indirectly impacting compliance and ethical considerations by hindering necessary business functions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based and tool-assisted approach. When a governance review flags a specific risk, the first step is to identify the most effective and efficient AWS native tools designed to address that risk. IAM Access Analyzer is the designated service for identifying unintended external access to AWS resources. The decision-making process should prioritize leveraging these tools for accurate detection, followed by a detailed analysis of the findings to understand the context and impact. Remediation should then be tailored based on this analysis, adhering to the principle of least privilege. This systematic approach ensures compliance with security best practices and regulatory requirements, while also maintaining operational efficiency and ethical data handling. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that optimizing guard duty's threat detection capabilities is crucial for efficient security operations. Considering the need to balance comprehensive threat coverage with resource management and alert fatigue, what is the most effective strategy for enabling and configuring guard duty? Option A. Rely solely on guard duty's default configuration without any customization or integration with other security tools, assuming it provides sufficient baseline protection. Option B. Implement guard duty by enabling core threat intelligence and common attack vector detections first, then iteratively enable additional features and specialized findings based on risk assessment, threat landscape analysis, and compliance requirements. Option C. Disable specific threat intelligence feeds or finding types that are perceived as less relevant to the organization's immediate threat profile to reduce noise and operational overhead. Option D. Enable all guard duty features and threat intelligence feeds immediately to ensure maximum visibility and coverage from the outset. Correct answer is D. Enable all guard duty features and threat intelligence feeds immediately to ensure maximum visibility and coverage from the outset. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cloud security operations, balancing the need for comprehensive threat detection with the operational overhead and potential for alert fatigue. Organizations must implement effective security monitoring without overwhelming their security teams or incurring unnecessary costs. The challenge lies in selecting the most efficient and effective guard duty configuration that aligns with business risk tolerance and regulatory compliance requirements, specifically within the AWS Certified Security Specialty Exams implied U.S. regulatory framework context, e.g., NIST, CMMC if applicable to government contractors, general data protection principles. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based enablement of guard duty features, starting with the most critical threat intelligence feeds and common attack vectors, e.g., reconnaissance, brute force, cryptocurrency mining, provides immediate value. This allows the security team to establish baseline detection capabilities and tune existing processes, subsequently enabling more specialized or less frequently triggered findings, e.g., specific malware types, unusual data exfiltration patterns. Based on the organization's specific threat landscape and compliance obligations, ensures that resources are focused on the highest impact detections first. This iterative process optimizes cost by avoiding unnecessary data processing and alert generation for low probability or low impact threats, while ensuring compliance by addressing known risks and maintaining a robust security posture. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and efficient resource allocation, which are foundational to secure and cost-effective cloud operations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Enabling all guard duty features immediately without prior analysis is professionally unacceptable due to significant cost implications and the high probability of alert fatigue. This approach fails to adhere to principles of efficient resource management and can lead to missed critical alerts as the security team becomes desensitized to a high volume of noise. From a regulatory perspective, while not a direct violation, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence in managing security resources effectively, which could be scrutinized during audits. Disabling specific threat intelligence feeds or finding types without a documented risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. This creates blind spots in the security posture, potentially leaving the organization vulnerable to threats that guard duty is designed to detect. Such an approach could lead to regulatory noncompliance if specific threats are mandated to be monitored, or if a breach occurs due to a known, detectable vulnerability that was intentionally ignored. It violates the ethical obligation to maintain a reasonable and effective security posture. Relying solely on guard duty's default settings without any customization or integration with other security tools is a suboptimal approach. While guard duty provides a strong baseline, its effectiveness can be significantly enhanced by tailoring it to the organization's unique environment and integrating its findings with security information and event management, SIEM systems or security orchestration, automation and response SOAR platforms. Failing to do so can lead to inefficient incident response and a less comprehensive understanding of the overall security landscape, potentially impacting compliance with requirements for integrated security monitoring. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based, iterative approach to guard duty configuration. This involves 1. Understanding the organization's critical assets and potential threat vectors. 2. Prioritizing guard duty features and findings based on their potential impact and likelihood. 3. Implementing a phased rollout, starting with high-priority detections. 4. Continuously monitoring guard duty's effectiveness, tuning configurations, and integrating findings with broader security operations. 5. Regularly reviewing cost implications and adjusting enablement based on evolving threats and business needs. This systematic process ensures that security investments are optimized, compliance requirements are met, and the security team can effectively respond to genuine threats. Question 20. Assessment of how a security analyst should prioritize and investigate a series of security findings surfaced by Amazon Guard Duty within Amazon Detective, considering the need for rapid threat identification and evidence gathering. Option A. Rely on general knowledge of common attack vectors to infer the nature of the security incident without detailed examination of the evidence in Amazon Detective. Option B. Immediately escalate all guard duty findings to the Security Operations Center, SOC lead, without any initial analysis in Amazon Detective. Option C. Begin by manually sifting through raw AWS CloudTrail logs for each potential indicator of compromise identified by guard duty. Option D. Focus on the findings view in Amazon Detective to identify and prioritize suspicious activities. Then drill down into specific events and resources to gather detailed evidence for root cause analysis. The correct answer is D. Focus on the findings view in Amazon Detective to identify and prioritize suspicious activities, then drill down into specific events and resources to gather detailed evidence for root cause analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security analyst to quickly and accurately interpret complex security findings within Amazon Detective, balancing the need for immediate threat mitigation with the requirement for thorough, evidence-based investigation. The challenge lies in synthesizing disparate log data, identifying the root cause of a potential compromise, and communicating findings effectively to stakeholders who may have varying levels of technical understanding. The pressure to respond rapidly to a potential security incident, while adhering to best practices and regulatory compliance, demands a systematic and informed approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it leverages Amazon Detective's core capabilities to provide a consolidated and contextualized view of security events. By focusing on the findings view, the analyst can efficiently identify and prioritize suspicious activities, such as unauthorized access attempts or unusual data exfiltration patterns. This allows for a targeted investigation, starting with the most critical indicators of compromise. The subsequent drill down into specific resources and timelines within Detective enables the analyst to gather detailed evidence, which is crucial for accurate root cause analysis and effective remediation. This methodical approach ensures that the investigation is comprehensive, evidence-driven, and aligned with the principles of incident response, minimizing the risk of overlooking critical details or making premature, unsubstantiated conclusions. This aligns with the general principles of security best practices and the need for due diligence in investigating security incidents, which are implicitly expected within the AWS Certified Security Specialty domain, focusing on U.S. regulatory frameworks and common industry standards. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely relies on reviewing raw CloudTrail logs without utilizing Detective's correlation and visualization features is professionally unacceptable. This is because it is inefficient, time-consuming, and prone to human error. It fails to leverage the specialized tools designed for security investigation, leading to a superficial understanding of the incident and potentially missing crucial connections between events. This could result in inadequate remediation and a failure to meet due diligence requirements in a security investigation, potentially violating compliance obligations if a breach is not properly contained or understood. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately escalate the finding to a senior team without conducting an initial investigation within Detective. This demonstrates a lack of initiative and an inability to perform basic triage. It delays the incident response process and burdens senior staff with tasks that could have been handled at a lower level. Ethically, it represents a failure to competently perform assigned duties and a lack of professional responsibility. Finally, an approach that focuses on anecdotal evidence or assumptions rather than the structured data presented by Amazon Detective is professionally unsound. Security investigations must be based on verifiable facts and evidence. Relying on guesswork or incomplete information can lead to misdiagnosis of the threat, incorrect remediation actions, and a failure to meet regulatory requirements for incident reporting and response, which often mandate evidence-based conclusions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach security investigations by first understanding the available tools and their capabilities. In this context, Amazon Detective is designed to streamline the analysis of security findings. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the primary tool for investigation, Amazon Detective. 2. Understanding the most efficient starting point within that tool, the findings view. 3. Systematically drilling down into evidence to confirm or refute hypotheses. 4. Documenting findings with clear, actionable evidence. 5. Communicating findings to relevant stakeholders based on the evidence gathered. This structured approach ensures that investigations are thorough, efficient, and defensible, aligning with professional standards and regulatory expectations for security incident response.